Welcome to Mogobe Nuggets of Wisdom podcast. My name is Mompoloki Lerumo Mogobe. Our objective is to enthuse, inspire, energize, and empower entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs of all stripes here in BW and beyond. We do so by inviting these entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs into our makeshift studio. Sometimes we call them to the restaurant, sometimes we go to our studio, and we ask them to share their experiential knowledge, their experiences and their expertise. And we ask them as many questions as we can, aimed at empowering you also as a viewer. Hello dear viewer, dear listener, my name is Mompoloki Lerumo Mogobe. Welcome once again to yet another episode of Mogobe Nuggets of Wisdom podcast. As always, we bring impactful, life-changing, and informative content to you each and every time. And I'm delighted today to bring a wonderful and talented guest. He's a playwright, he's a poet, he's a columnist, he's an academic, and he's an entrepreneur, Mr. Barolong Seboni, my dear friend Barox. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
I'm here at last.
Okay, we've been planning this for a while. Would you care to tell the viewer who you are in terms of your background and what your main economic activities are?
Ke Barolong Seboni. Ke mosimane wa Mokwena. My full-time job is a senior lecturer at the University of Botswana in the Department of English. I teach literature, I breathe literature, I write literature. So basically that's who I am.
Yes, we're going to talk today about the enterprise of writing as a business. It's something that you've been doing for a big chunk of your life. Can you tell us a bit of your educational background and how you got into writing as a way of making a living in addition to what you do?
Okay, I did my standard 7 in England, in London, primary school and a bit of secondary school. Then I came to Mueding and then went to UB and then to the US for my master's. And that's when I joined the University of Botswana. Now that background is important because, you know, having lived in London in my youth, in my primary years, helped me with the facility of the English language and really understanding that part of the world and the people who populate that part of the world. So that when I was now growing up in Botswana, language, the English language was never really a problem for me. In fact, it was an advantage, and it is through that advantage that my teachers encouraged me and nudged me in the direction of literature and writing.
Now let's talk about writing as a career, in fact, as a way of as a way of sustenance. You're involved in poetry. You're involved in the past, at least I used to read your columns, and you've written 1 or 2 books. Am I right?
Well, 13.
13 books.
Published.
Oh, okay. Forgive me for undervaluing the number there. Tell us about that in terms of when you started singing as a career and when it became a source of livelihood for you.
Yeah, like I said, I was very fortunate to have mentors, and that's the number one thing for young writers. Always seek out a mentor. It's very, very important, who will look at your work and advise you and nudge you in the right direction. So I always had that, you know, around me, both at secondary school, and especially at university. You know, my mentors were the professors at the time, but they were also, at the same time as being academics, they were also writers in their own right, who had published poetry, who had published plays. Names that come to mind: Professor Bob Leshwai. He was a dramatist of note. He's passed away. In terms of poetry and short stories, we had Professor Mbulelo Mzamani, a South African as well, who mentored us. We also had Professor Khosi Tsile, Piorapeto Khosi Tsile, who is very well known, especially in the States, who has published a lot. So, you know, that grounding and foundation helped me across a lot of hurdles that I would have otherwise had. Another important thing in my career as a young writer was, you know, we were involved in the establishment of the writers' workshop in the English department, which is now 40 years old. And
Wonderful.
it's still going. But now to answer your question directly, we discovered that, you know, writing, although we discovered late in our lives, writing can be a business and is a business. It is the business of writing. And I'm happy to tell you that once we discovered that, you know, it could be a business, we then went on to establish workshops, writing workshops for younger writers, for which we are paid as consultants. It's one way of making money. Another way that we developed the art was we decided that we should take control of our works by getting into the business of publishing.
Does that mean you go about being self-publishers and registering your books, copywriting them, and so on?
Yes, it means taking charge of your copyrighted work. That's very, very important. Taking charge.
Why is it important?
Because a lot of the times when we were young and naive, we would just let anybody take our works and publish them before we realized their value. Your creative works are very valuable inherently. So your duty as a writer and the creator of literature, of the art, is to also be in charge, to manage your creative output.
On that point, how do you go about maybe using facilities such as SIPA, protecting your copyrighted works? Can you give a young aspiring writer an idea of what steps to take?
Yes. Fortunately, I've been involved with COSBOTS, the Copyright Society of Botswana, which is under SIPA. I was on the board there for 4 years, 3 years. And one of the things that we encourage young writers and young artists is to register their works with COSBOTS, the Copyright Society of Botswana, so that it is protected and so that people cannot steal your intellectual property. Once it's registered, you know, it is protected from abuse, it is protected from people using it without your permission. Most importantly, you make money out of it if people use it. Now, I like your question because what COSBOTS is doing now is pushing the writers. Before, it was mostly the musicians who were taken care of. But now, it is the writers through the copyright and intellectual property laws, and especially through a section or a sector of COSBOTS called reprography.
Reprography.
Yes, where, you know, if you have registered your works, anybody who photocopies it has to pay you.
Okay. All right, let's take the discussion a little bit further. But maybe before I ask about monetization, let me ask you about Alexandra McCall Smith. I've seen you once or twice when he's in Gaborone. You are spending time with him. Is he one of your mentors? And if so, what have you learned from him?
I wouldn't say a mentor per se, because I was already an established writer when I met him, but more a kindred spirit, a colleague who took interest in my poetry, and I took interest in his stories. I carry Kenewa number one ladies.
For those who don't know.
Yes.
Number one ladies detective agency.
Yes. Though that series.
Yes.
And yes, his what I've learned from him is that you take your work very seriously. He has a regimen. He has a very strict timetable, if you will, of waking up at a certain time. And whether or not he has any idea of what he's going to write, he sits down and just starts writing until a certain time of the day when he does other things. And he's very strict about that. The second thing that I have learned from him is that it is not enough to just have your works in between two covers and call it a book.
Yes.
You have to explore other opportunities of how the work can reward you. He, of course, then had his books made into movies.
Hollywood movies, for that matter.
Exactly. And we shall talk about how we are doing that.
Okay, and that really takes me to the next question, which is, how do you actually specifically monetize your art, the art of writing, the art of authorship? Assuming that the viewer is totally ignorant like me, how do you go about it?
Yes, I'll just talk about my own experience, and hopefully it will encourage the young ones. The way that I did it, I don't know if it was by accident, but I don't remember sitting down and saying, I'm going to make money, you know.
Yeah.
I was just overwhelmed by this spirit of creativity and said, how can I, you know, bring characters to life and talk about real issues? And that's when I went into the column, writing a column called Nitty Gritty for The Guardian and then for Michi. Before then it was Thinking Aloud. And, you know, through that...
Allowed as in permitted.
Yes. And through that, you know, we got paid. They paid us for writing the column. And I thought, okay, here's something. And then the next step, of course, is to collect those articles that I wrote over the years and publish them into a book. So this is one way of monetizing it. The other way, which we will talk about when we get to it, but I might as well talk about it now.
Go ahead.
Yes, is that everything now is digital. You have moved from radio now to your YouTube podcast, you know. We are now moving from the printed word, hardcover, softcover, to digitalized publishing.
Like audiobooks?
Audiobooks and also ebooks.
Yes.
You know, there you're opening up your work to the whole world. There's a brilliant and hardworking young lady called, who's helping me do that. She's set up, I don't know what it's called, something similar to what Amazon is doing, but she's doing it for Botswana. Her name is Rachel Nekati.
Rachel?
Nekati. You know, so she set up sort of like what Amazon does, but she's doing it for Botswana, where I can give her my soft copy works, and then she sells them to the whole world on the internet, and then we go into some profit sharing,
Wow.
just like Amazon does.
That's wonderful. Now, I do know that you are also involved in the university, and that you've also been involved in radio. You had a radio show. Talk about those activities which took a fair part of your time over the years.
Yes. Actually, it's also an answer to your question of how you monetize your creativity, your creative works. You know, I was approached initially by RB1 because I was known to be a lover of jazz fusion. And it wasn't popular at the time in the early 90s. Jazz was popular, but not so much jazz fusion. So Moreri Habakore thought I could have a program. He was assistant director at the time.
At Radio Botswana?
Yes, RB1 in 1990. And I could play, you know, my jazz CDs and whatever little they had there in their library, which
I understand
grew.
you have quite a collection.
Yes, I do.
Yes.
So that was one way of being creative and using your creativity to share with other people, to make a little money. As you know, it doesn't pay much, but you know, we do it for the love of the thing. And then we moved on to RB2 to do the oldies through the late Mike Klink. He recruited me there. And then from RB2, I then moved over to Gabs FM to do a talk show, you know.
You did for many years.
Yes, I did it for several years. So these are the different ways in which you can be creative and use your creativity, your writing, your ability to speak, your ability to act in order to support yourself.
Well, your main gig, so to speak, is teaching as an academic. What does that entail? What does that involve in terms of the challenges to your creativity and so on?
In fact, I'm glad you asked that. If you really look carefully at my career, you will see everything else that I do as a spin-off from that main gig.
Yes.
You know, at UB, at the University of Botswana, I teach literature. But with the other things that I do on the side, I promote literature, I promote creative writing, I promote the business of writing. So all these things are related and intertwined. Even on radio, you know, there's a lot of creativity there, you know, in writing scripts and so on.
Okay. No, that's interesting. So you teach right up to what, doctorate level, master's level?
Yes. Well, we supervise MA students who
MA in what? In literature?
Master's courses in literature, and we sit in on PhD presentations and so on. But most importantly for me, we also have adopted your way of talking in the plural of we.
Okay, okay, it's all right.
Most importantly, we create literature. And a lot of people don't see that as an academic enterprise, but it is. You cannot teach literature without the literature itself. And what we found lacking in Botswana is that we didn't have a large enough corpus of literature to be able to incorporate it into the syllabus. But now we do. We have developed courses in Botswana literature, which are now up and running.
as your friend, I happen to know that you'll be retiring in the near future. Do you have any definite plans post-retirement in terms of how it's going to dovetail into these other activities?
It will definitely dovetail into these activities because one, I'm going to continue writing and finish off writing projects that I had started. One of the major projects that we had started is, I've now ventured into writing drama and play, both for theater and for radio, and also screenplays for movies. And our biggest project in that respect is Sechele. Sechele the First, a historical play based on the life of Sechele Wabakwena. The play focuses on his encounter with David Livingstone and how Livingstone, the missionary, converted him, and how that caused a huge clash, conflict with his own culture, with his own traditional and customary beliefs.
Is this the same king who was a warrior king?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Because Livingstone told him not to practice rainmaking anymore. And, people actually felt he had neglected them. They were wailing and crying in the whole village for Sechele, the rainmaker, will no longer make rain. He's now been taken by the white man into this new religion.
Did he actually make rain?
Well, he was a rainmaker. And people believed that, and that's why there was a hula baloo, because people believed that in the time of drought, which they were going through, it was really caused by the fact that he had now left his duty as a rainmaker.
So are we likely to see this play as a movie in the big screens?
That's our intention. Our ultimate goal is to try and get Sechele both as a radio drama and also as a big screen movie.
Okay, did you write the entire thing yourself?
Good question. We did something unique here. In my involvement with young writers, I thought, let me not be selfish. Let me involve these talented young people. There are about 5 or 6 of them. And what we did was, I came up with the rough idea, the plot, and so on. And I got them to research into the life of Sechele. And then together, we made his life and his involvement with Livingstone come to life. So we workshopped it. Yeah. So it's, it was written by Barolong Seboni with the Betlo literary artists, as they are called.
There's a gentleman by the name of Ramsey who used to write a lot on the history of, or who does write a lot on the history of Bakwena and Botswana in general. Is he part of the project? Did he have any input?
No, but we relied a lot on his material for his PhD dissertation. He wrote the history of Bakwena, and a big chunk of it is, the life of Sechele. So we relied on his writings about Sechele. We also relied on the writings of other historians on the life of David Livingstone.
So as I'm talking to you, if somebody wants to read more about Sechele, is it in the form of a book, or how does one access the information before it goes into a screen, big screen?
Well, one, read the play, read our play. And then
it's available from
exclusive books and from the UB bookstore. I don't know if they still have copies. Or you can just contact us through your program. Now, so the Sechele project is a big project, because under that, we are going to write about other kings and queens of Botswana, and not just Bakwena, but Bakhatla, Bakalanga, and other Bangwaketsi.
It's obvious you attach a lot of importance to the history. Why would you say it's important to get in touch with our roots in that sense?
Because, you know, that's who we are, and that's what we are. You know, there's no spiritual fulfillment in not knowing who you really are. In understanding Sechele, for instance, and reading about his life and reading our play, you will get to know that the formation of Botswana did not just happen in 1966. It's a long process. You will also get to know that Botswana fought wars against the Boers, the 2 or 3 Tswana Boer wars of the 1850s. People don't know that. People
Why
don't
is this
know
not
that.
being taught in
I
our,
don't know. I
our
don't
schools?
know. I have no idea.
But this play talks about those things.
Yes, the characters there. There's actually a scene where Sechele and Kosidinsi and his wife, Sechele's wife, he fought that war with his wife. He had his wife by his side, his first wife. And Sechele, by the way, was a very good marksman. So he would have, the wife's role was to load the guns. You know, she would load the guns and pass them on to him. I guess it was not the automatic rifle.
Yes.
So you could only take one shot, you know, so he would take a shot, the wife loads, and so on and so forth. People don't know this history, that those wars that...
In other words, Sechele did win a number of wars. How many wars he won?
Well, the Tswana Boer wars, there were 2 of them, Tsako di Mawe, and then people need to know that our independence as a sovereign nation did not come on a silver platter. If Sechele had not, and his people, by the way, it was not just the Bakwena. He looked to Bangwaketsi and all other tribes. No, Bangwatu a little far, but you know,
He mobilized
yes,
the tribes in the south.
Yes, to fight with him. And so one of the roles that he played was as a unifier of the Tswana tribes at the time.
So on that point, what do you think, what do you say to those people who say Botswana are not hardworking because they got their independence on a silver platter?
Well, these are people who have not seen as Reloko King, Reloko Masi.
Yes.
Ke batho ba tswang go tswanteng ka fly machine ba lenda mo ga borone ba itlhela re ja mo di restaurant we are not hardworking.
Yeah.
But you know, take a trip. Ba ise go Marakeng, ba ise go Masing. Tell them about Sechele and how he beat the Boers, you know.
And they'll know that we're hardworking.
Exactly.
Now, as a poet, you do have several poems you've penned, and I'm sure out of those poems, there's a favorite that you like. Would you want to tell us which one is your favorite, and perhaps tell us why, and share with us maybe a verse or two?
Yeah. I have several, which are my favorite. Amongst them, Ke Gaborone Mall, which is very popular amongst the first years. Some of my poems are required text at the university. Others are taught at JC.
You're talking about the old CBD. Because the mall you're talking about.
Oh, yes, Gaborone Mall.
Because here we're in the new CBD.
Yes. Yeah, ha kere Gaborone Mall ke ra kana bidiwa eng yano? Main Mall.
Main Mall.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. In those days, it was the center of the world for us.
Yes.
And that was the inspiration for the poem. You know, I was trying to figure out this center of the world, which is symbolic of development, economic development. What does it really mean? You know? And, you know, so that's how the poem came about.
Can you share with us the poem, please?
Yes, but the one that I'm going to read, which is my other favorite, is called AIDS. Now, this was written during the time of the pandemic. So I like it because it's very short, but to the point. It reads like this. How cruel these modern times. We make love in the dark, and in the light, a terrible new death is born. As you can see, the poem is very, very short, but there's a lot of symbolism, there's a lot of metaphors, there's a lot of contrast between
What do you
darkness
mean we make love?
and
I don't understand. You say we make love in the
in
dark
the
and
dark.
then in the morning?
And then in the light,
Uh-huh.
a terrible new death is born.
Okay.
Yeah. There is that paradox of life and death, you know.
You're referring to the way the disease comes about.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And the contrast between darkness and lightness, death and birth, and the irony of the cruelty of these modern times. You know, modern times you think we would have everything under control. Well, here comes COVID-19, which shows us that we don't have it under control.
Yeah. You've shared some of your poems in some of the prestigious stages across the world. Could you share with us some of those experiences and perhaps share with us one highlight of that background, that experience?
Yes. I've traveled all over the world performing my art, reading to people, giving lectures on Botswana poetry and my own poetry. The highlight, though, was in Italy, where just by, to emphasize what I've been saying for the people, if you have the talent, use it right. Just by a coincidence, an Italian couple that used to come here, every year, they are psychiatrists, so they have a little money. So every year they come to Bots.
They come to the Delta?
To the Delta, to Kutse. They are wildlife enthusiasts, you know. So one day, this is how I met them. One day they said they were at the airport and they wanted to buy a gift for a friend. So they saw my book. As you know, Europeans are into books. So they bought the book, and what attracted them was the title, Wind Songs of the Kalahari.
Wind Songs of the Kalahari.
Yes. So they bought this book and they gave it to their friend. Their friend was so enthralled by this book that she's an educator. So she decided to translate it into Italian. She did translate it into Italian, and guess what? It won an award. Her translation of my book won an award, and because of that,
congratulations.
thank you. And because of that, I was invited to Rome, where there was the launch of her award-winning translation of my book. And I was invited on a tour, a week's tour of some towns in Italy where I would read my book, my poems, and they would be translated simultaneously. So if it wasn't for my writing, I would have never seen Italy, you know.
What was so touching about this particular book? Is there any particular thing about it that resonated with this couple?
Well, it was mainly because they were in love with Botswana, and they saw in my poetry, they saw the vision that I had. Wind Song of the Kalahari is arranged in such a way that the reader has an eagle's eye view of Botswana. I imagine that you are an eagle flying across Botswana. So it starts from the Okavango in terms of the poems.
Yes.
Flies over the villages and the towns and ends in the Kalahari.
Wow.
One of the popular poems in that collection is a poem called Molepolole, where Molepolole is a crocodile which is stuck deep in the mud and so on and so forth.
Okay. All right. I happen to know that you're involved in other entrepreneurial activities. You're just not limited to your art. You're not just limited to your writing. There is, for instance, an organization with which you and I are involved called Tsela Alliance. There's also something that you have involved yourself with called the Beef Fest. Can you, in a nutshell, explain those two activities?
Yes. I will just correct so that the reader doesn't think it's called Sola.
Slip of the tongue.
Yeah, Tsela,
Yes.
Tsela Alliance.
Yes.
Yes, that came from a vision that we had in the early 90s. Really, as Botswana, well, we were not very young, but we were young. We were in our 40s. As young Botswana, how can we get into this cake, get a piece of this cake in the business world? And the most obvious way was to come together as a group of 10, contributing monthly, and then, diversifying in terms of our investment portfolios, investing that money in different places. And then not only that, reaching out to other groups, similar groups. It was a trend in the early 90s. So we found other groups, 10 other groups with which we could club together and raise more money and invest into bigger projects. So that's how that works.
Okay, and it's still running now.
It's still running. It's now 20 odd years. How many years now?
Well, actually, we talked about it in the 90s, but we started in 1996, as I recall.
Okay.
So since 96, the company Tsela Alliance has been operational.
Yes.
And it's got in excess of 12 projects that it has over the years developed, and some of which are still running. Let's talk about the Beef Fest.
That's another pet project of mine. That started 7 years ago in 2013. The vision behind that was I wanted to come up with a concept where Botswana could celebrate who they are, And one way of doing that is, finding something that would unite them. And I found beef to be at the center, not only of our cuisine, but also of our economy. So in celebrating beef, you're celebrating both your culture and cuisine, and you're also promoting the economy. So that's how I landed on the idea of the Beef Fest. And as you know, it just blew.
And for those who don't know, what actually happens in the Beef Fest?
Yeah, Beef Fest.
Sorry,
yes.
not beef. There is the Beef Fest. Sorry, Beef Fest.
Yeah, well, what happens at the Beef Fest is that it's a lifestyle event. So people come with their cooler boxes and their camp chairs, their children. It's a family event. It's also a corporate event because corporations, book marquees to be with their business partners to talk business, while families are there eating and drinking. But mostly it's centered around the idea of beef, khomo. And we provide all the different parts of the khomo, mateng, mala, and all that.
Does everybody bring that cow, or how does
no,
it work?
No.
How does it work? Where do you get the cattle?
We slaughter about 6 cattle, and you have braai pieces. We have mogodu.
We have tripe.
We have tripe. We have mokwechepe, we have mokoto, we have tlhako, seswa, lulimi.
Okay.
And,
So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and then in the evening, it's a music festival.
Wow.
Yeah.
And when is the next one? Or has COVID?
COVID
messed it up?
Yeah. So we're hoping that next year when things
stabilize.
Stabilize, we would have to do it again.
Okay. We have a segment of this show, Seboni, where you get to ask me one question.
Only one.
Just one question. Within reason, obviously, I'll answer it, and so on and so forth. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, my one question is, how do you manage? You are a multitasker. You are a multi-talented fellow. You are you're a lawyer. You're a real estate investor. You are a whole lot of others. A radio presenter. You are a blogger. How do you manage the time?
It's an easy question to answer because I have mentors and friends like you. Because you have shown me that there's no limit. The only thing that limits us is our own imagination. So I have found that as long as you work with other people, as long as you are empowering those people, as long as you benefit with them, not alone. And one of the things I do with my employees, I say, you are not working for me, you are working with me. So I try to get them to take ownership of these different enterprises so that my job becomes that of managing managers. So you've seen, when we started as friends, I've grown from strength to strength over time, but I still have a long way to go. There are people in this very city, in this very town, who are hundreds of thousands of miles ahead of me.
I doubt it.
So there's still a lot to achieve. On top of that, I think there's a lot of people to inspire, to energize, and to enthuse, which is the main purpose, to give back to others and to empower others. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, you have.
Yes.
And you've answered it well, and I agree with you. Use your talents to empower other people.
Absolutely. Now, as we come to the end, I'd like you to look at the camera, Mr. Seboni, and give one parting, powerful, inspirational message that people can take home with them.
Yeah, well, I'm a writer and a poet, and I work with the imagination. I'm a creative artist. I work with the imagination. I create literature that makes things come alive. So I believe in the imagination. And I agree with you, Lerumo, where you say, the imagination has no limit. There's no limit to the imagination. And so I would like to encourage people to tap into their imagination, to come up with solutions to problems and turn them into businesses, and two, to art, use their imagination to create new art, new ideas, new poems, new paintings that will reflect us, Botswana, our culture, our aspirations, and our future.
Well, it remains for me to take this time, sir, to applaud you, to thank you, and to appreciate your friendship over the years, and to ask you to keep keeping on. And please do not hesitate should we invite you back to Mogobe Nuggets of Wisdom. My last request as we part company is to speak to the viewer and ask them to subscribe to Mogobe Nuggets of Wisdom, if you don't mind doing that.
Oh, okay. Yes, I think here we're on to something good, something that I approve of, which is, sharing these nuggets. Nuggets, by the way, are, raw pieces of precious metals, precious
gold and so on.
Gold and what have you. So yeah, support this so that it can support itself.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much for coming to the studio, Mr. Barox.
Thank you.
Thank you.